Okay, so we are now recording. So welcome everyone to our weekly call, the last call of May. So we're sort of roaring to the halfway point in the year nearly, which is quite scary. Seems like it's been a pretty quick year thus far. Let me share my screen. Okay, which I've now done, so that should appear in front of you. Yeah, for the call this week, as promised a couple of weeks ago, I'm going to just spend a little bit of time talking about the RSA conference of a few weeks back, as I hadn't really had time to prepare some thoughts on the Monday immediately afterwards. It took place at the very end of April, beginning of May, so the sort of effectively the start of this month in San Francisco. So we'll talk about that, and then, as always, touch on some recent developments, of which have been a lot over the last 7 days, as you'll see shortly, as well as a reminder of some forthcoming events and what's on the list of topics for future calls. And then, time permitting, we'll cover any other business as well. So that's the plan for the call. So I'm going to jump right into the RSA conference. So as a reminder, it takes place once a year. I think pretty much as far as I'm aware, always in San Francisco. So it takes over all three buildings in the Moscone Center in the center of San Francisco, if you know the city at all, and runs for 4 days. And concurrent with the conference is an extremely large expo which runs in the basement of the Moscone North and South buildings. The conference itself runs in parts of those, but primarily in Moscone West, using the conference rooms there. They claim this year that they've had a total of 44,000 people. So. And that's all in person, so a pretty substantial attendee sort of turnout. I think I've never really drilled down into numbers. That's inclusive of people that go purely for the expo, not just for the conference. But nevertheless, the conference itself is pretty substantial, and typically there are potentially 20 plus sessions running in parallel at any given time over the 4 days. So an enormous number of workshops, sort of kicking off at 8:30 in the morning. So there's a lot of content. I'll just refer to some notes. So I'm just going to put on the screen some of the workshops from each day, which were on my agenda. I'm not going to go through those at length because it takes far too long, but I will just reference some notes that I made whilst I was there. So let's see, just referencing those for a moment. Oh yeah, during the opening plenary, so before any of the conference sessions kicked off, G2 Patel, Cisco's Executive VP and Chief Product Officer, announced the launch of Foundation AI to develop an open source security models and a new AI supply chain risk management and new AI supply chain risk management controls. So that was an announcement from Cisco at the very start of the conference itself. In terms of content, I pick up one of the workshops from day one, as it's also relevant in the news highlights this week as well, which encrypted client hello, so ECH was a topic of a presentation by my sort of good friends Arnaud Tadai and Roloff Dutoit of Broadcom, who sort of shared their sort of perspectives on whether it gave enhanced privacy or a loss of visibility for defenders, so privacy for users possibly, or loss of visibility to defenders. Well, certainly that's by design. But as I say, I'll come back to that topic in the news headlines as well. But actually, the sort of most interesting sort of highlight of day one for me was it was a discussion chaired by Ted Schleen with Paul M. Nakasone, Paul being the former director of the NSA, and Chris Krebs, the former director of CISA. So both pretty high-profile figures. I think this was a few days after Chris had found that the new executive in the Oval Office had asked the Department of Justice to initiate action against him. He famously declared the 2020 election the most secure in US history, which I'm guessing wasn't the answer that the then president, now current president, wished to hear. But it was an interesting discussion, a bit of a fireside chat with the three of them. If you only watch one recording from day one, I'd certainly watch that one, and I'll share links to the recordings when I share the link to the recording of this call. But it covered sort of geopolitics, cyber security regulations, AI policy, industrial strategy, and software liability, amongst many other things. And Chris, sort of towards the back end of the discussion, his call to action was make CISA great again, in the aftermath of some recent headcount reductions in CISA. So it was an interesting discussion, well worth listening. But Peter, I believe you got your hand raised, so did you want to?
Yeah, I was just curious, was this, he resigned from his company, right? Because of was this after that?
So this was roughly 3 weeks ago. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure is the answer to that, but pretty recent. And I'll mention this again later as well. The benefit of him and Paul and other recent sort of leaders from the cybersecurity sort of infrastructure, if that's the right word, within the sort of US executive, is because they're no longer in those roles. They were obviously able to give pretty sort of forthright views on a whole raft of things.
I think I'm going to go and watch that one.
So I would definitely watch. I mean, Chris had, I think, left CISA a little while before that, but I think he was working for himself or another company by that point. But I'm not sure. I'm rambling.
Thanks.
But yeah, it was interesting to hear him. And I think he was wearing socks either in this session or another one, which I'll mention later on in the week, sort of sacked via tweet, I think, where it said on the socks, which I thought was quite fun, just as a small piece of minutiae from one of the sessions. But yeah, as I say, definitely worth watching that session if you have a moment. And obviously the other things I listed on the screen likewise, but that in particular. Okay, I'll move on to day two. And if anyone wants to interrupt me, probably follow Peter's example, raise your virtual hand, probably be the easiest way of catching my attention, or put something in the chat, and apologies if I don't notice it straight away. But yeah, from day two, the sort of really fun start, really innovative format for the first session, which was done in the form of a trial from sort of obviously people with legal expertise, specifically focusing on whistleblowers, and it was a whistleblower versus a whistleblower and a supposed CISO of a company against the sort of the CEO. It was the sort of format for the trial, and who might have liability in a very specific sort of circumstances. Well, boy, with the details in one way, it doesn't really matter. As I say, I thought it was a really interesting format, just to give a bit of variety to sort of more traditional sort of discussions at an event. Let me pause there as David's raised his virtual hand, and then I'll plough on. So, David, did you want to jump in?
I did. Thank you. And I apologize I'm late, but on your day one, on the highlight, one of the things that was interesting and that I didn't see covered in detail about the whole notion of ECH giving is goodbye to visibility. I wanted to put in an alert there that what is not well understood yet by the industry is that what the approach of using DNS at the root of trust addresses that visibility concern. Because if you don't have the ECH visibility at a proxy layer, but you address it before that, and of course, with what Microsoft and what we have done, that has been something that's been on the horizon for a long time. But we think that is the proper way to do it because you are not sacrificing any you're not sacrificing user privacy, but you're applying the security principles. Just wanted to make sure that that was registered. Thank you.
We'll come back to that that whole sort of zero trust sort of discussion a bit later anyway, David.
Okay.
It's a good thought and
I'll be here.
there. And I will revisit ECH as well on top of that because it was also in the news over the last few days. But yeah, good points. And yeah, maybe it does. I think the reason for that session was to make sure that more CISOs had awareness of ECH on their agenda, particularly those in regulated industries. Yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the solutions to that is to move from a sort of traditional model of trying to detect sort of malicious content to one where you work exclusively with allow lists and then, to an extent, barring attacks on the sites, you overcome that, or at least a large part of that risk, as I say, other than sort of attacks on the sites that are on your allow list, but you've at least reduced the attack surface significantly. But as we'll come back to that topic. Okay. Other highlights from day two, and as with day one, I'm not going to go through line by line the stuff that the sessions I went to, but just reference a few things. So from one of the plenary sessions, Bruce Schneier, if I can speak properly, well known in the cyber security industry, made reference to the impact of AI, and I should have said this earlier, AI was all pervasive throughout the 4 days, even where it didn't really belong. It nevertheless reared its head significantly. And he sort of talked about the sort of integrity and regulatory problems that AI is and will continue to cause, and suggested that one of the solutions to that was we need to incentivize trustworthy AI. So that's definitely, again, Bruce being sort of a long-standing person within the cyber industry, always useful to hear what he has to say. There were some interesting presentations on the RSA Conference Launchpad. So these are sort of companies in the early stages of their sort of evolution, but 3 were showcased on the Launchpad, and I'll put a brief note against each one of those in the notes to this call rather than rattling off those now. And also, I should say, on day 2, in addition to catching up with friends from Broadcom, specifically Arno and Laura, who presented on ECH on the Monday, I did also have a very pleasant lunch with David and friends from Adam Networks, which was also good to get out in the sunshine, which was really rather lovely in San Francisco for the beginning or end of of April, beginning of May. So that was rather lovely as well. Okay, moving on to day 3. We had an interesting sort of session at the start, not a normal one really for the RSA. I don't think, certainly not that I've witnessed over the last few years. We had two the team from the International Committee for the Red Cross talking about how the laws of war apply to cyber actors, and for example, underlining prohibitions on attacking civilians, medical and humanitarian facilities, and underlining that applied to sort of cyber attacks as much as it might do to so-called kinetic attacks. And I was expecting them to mention, but they didn't in this session, the activity that's underway in the ITF through the DiEM Digital Emblems working group, or proposed working group, which potentially helps to minimize the risk of unintended attacks on, for example, Red Cross type facilities by sort of hackers. But it was a more sort of general presentation than that, so an unusual topic to sort of touch on. I also thought, given the prevalence of AI through the week, it was quite fun to have Ira Winkler sort of talk about AI just being maths, and debunking some of the so-called AI washing that is taking place in the industry pretty blatantly on a few occasions, certainly at the RSA Conference, if you wandered around the expo. And it was quite useful to get his perspective on the hype wave. So if you just want to get a sort of a common sense take on AI stroke maths stroke statistics, then again that could be quite a good session to watch. And just scan down to see a couple of things. Let's see. Oh yeah. Also on day 2, another former NSA director, Rob Joyce, was present. Traditionally, over the last few years, Rob has participated in a State of the Hack session, one of the highlights of the week, in my opinion. Both in his capacity when he was NSA director, and then has recently departed NSA director when he did a sort of a double act with the then incumbent. That was on the agenda for this year, but was pulled at the last minute. But I did catch Rob in conversation with CEO of Corelight in the briefing centre on the Wednesday, which was pretty interesting, just to catch his sort of a 20-minute State of the Hack, so very much a very succinct version, which I've captured some notes for, and I'll add those to the notes from this call, as I'm not sure the sort of recording of that will be made more generally available, as it was in this sort of a showcase on the expo floor rather than in the main conference facilities. So again, that was also a worthwhile action on day 3. And then on day 4, again, sort of wide-ranging set of topics. For example, the so-called cyber poverty gap, just underlining, when you've got a very sort of sophisticated audience like that gathered at the RSA, that not all their sort of capabilities are readily available everywhere, particularly to civil society groups. So there's a bit of discussion about how to level some of those inequities through a range of sort of different initiatives. But probably the highlight from sort of day 4 that I'll mention is Hollywood's take on cyber conflict. which featured discussions between Chris Krebs, I mentioned earlier, former CISA director, Jen Easterly, also a former CISA director, and Rob Joyce, former NSA director, and Michael Schmidt, a reporter at the New York Times, who helped moderate the discussion. He's also, in addition to being a journalist at the New York Times, a co-producer of Zero Day, which I think was on Netflix. I might be wrong with that. Again, very wide-ranging, pretty relaxed conversation over the course of an hour or so. So again, definitely, if you had limited time to catch up on some of the recordings, that would be another one I'd highlight. Watch that one. Again, covered use of AI by attackers, how adversaries are stockpiling exploits, the capability to incite unrest through disinformation, and sort of challenge national resilience, etc. So again, some pretty wide-ranging discussions. Really interesting. And given this was prior to, for example, the widespread network power outages in Spain and Portugal of a couple of weeks ago, and various other issues with attacks on retailers in the UK and so on. So it maybe gives an interesting context to some of that if you want to be gloomy. Definitely worth catching up on that. I'll spend a moment in a second on the one that's at the bottom of the slide, though, DNS, denial of service, recent vulnerabilities and modern defences, which was the sole very specific DNS one that I went to through the week. And I see in the chat a good point from Michael about potentially the IRTF. That sort of cyber policy gap could cover presentation from at maybe an IRTF Open with a future IRTF meeting, or likewise its equivalents at RIPE, NANOG, etc. So yeah, fair point, Michael, and certainly a topic that could be usefully aired more widely. Okay, so let me just move on then. I thought I'd just spend a moment or two specifically on the DNS DOS one, which I think was about a 45-minute slot that they had. The primary topic was the as titled, denial of service and sort of recent vulnerabilities and modern defences. It was two researchers from ETH Zurich, effectively the Federal Institute of Technology, to translate ETH into English, in Zurich. And two researchers from there, Huayi Dian, I think, something like that, and Jelt van Bommel presented. They talked about how they'd, in a very structured way, looked to discover some vulnerabilities in the DNS to denial of service attacks. Inevitably, AI was involved in that sort of discovery process, and they developed what they describe as a comprehensive executable formal semantics for DNS resolution to help systematize that. Yes, to the question Alex was asked in the chat, the slides are, I believe, available. I'll put a link to those when I share a link to this recording, so you have a chance to pull those off in the form of a PDF. Take a look. Actually, Michael's ahead of me. That was correct, Michael, who's shared possibly that presentation. So, but I'll definitely check post-call and share that. Now, they did highlight some vulnerabilities, they sort of demonstrated how they used their approach to find some vulnerabilities and find some potential mitigations. And they were really making the case for, as it says on the slide, to have a sort of an automated verification approach to look for potential bugs and vulnerabilities. They pointed out that the complexity of the DNS and how many standards documents there are that cover in various sort of ways the different facets of the DNS. So you've got to read an awful lot of RFCs to get the full sort of scope of the current sort of valid versions. So it was an interesting presentation. I think it's worth a look at that, and I will try and find, again, looking at the chat, a link to a copy of the slides which is accessible without having an RSA account to do so. So hopefully that'll be fixed when you get a link to the recording. They sort of did, in my opinion, a very abrupt pivot towards the end of their time slot, and made a case for Scion, which is sort of a more hardwired use of the internet infrastructure with a sort of deterministic routing. So a bit like NASA in some ways, where one of the topics of a BOF at the recent ITF meeting, which got a fairly hard time from the community, because I think one of the issues with having a hardwired approach is it makes it more brittle and less robust in the event of an outage. And it to me, didn't really seem to belong with the rest of the presentation, other than slightly tenuous. It could provide a more robust foundation for the DNS, but that really felt like it sort of tried to just justify retrospectively how to talk about Scion at the same time. And I understand, well, I found out subsequently that Scion was also something which was developed as a concept at ETH Zurich, possibly by the same sort of network security group within the institute. So that's possibly why they included it, even though it didn't really fit that well, in my opinion, with the subject matter. I think that's possibly, I think that's my last slide, other than, as always, the closing plenary is always a highlight of the ITF, there's a Freudian slip, of the RSA Conference. Essentially the chair of the programme committee, Hugh Thompson, seems to have an almost unlimited budget to bring in anything that he's interested in into that last sort of hour or so plenary. And this year he kicked off with a set, roughly half-hour set by DJ Irie, half-hour from the Jazz Mafia, and then an interview with Jamie Foxx, who also sort of joined in with the DJ Irie set, I think spontaneously. I don't think that was planned. So you got sort of two for the price of one with Jamie, both guest DJ as well as interviewee as well. So that was interesting, but absolutely nothing to, well, very tenuous links to technology. It's mainly stuff that that Hugh Thompson, the chair of the RSA Conference, likes, and why not? When you've got 44,000 paying customers, you've got a big budget, I guess, so can afford to do that. So all in all, a good event, very well attended, and absolutely no issues, for me at least, on immigration. And seeing on the chat, I can see some issues, people being able to access recordings and links to slides. I'll have a look with that sort of post-call and see what can be done to access them. Apologies in advance if it's not possible to do so, but I'll have a look. Okay, that brings us to some of the news headlines. So as I said, I come back to the sort of topic of ECH. And towards the end of this, I'll come back to the topic of zero trust as well. But specifically on ECH, I came across a report from Karata, a sort of cyber security company. They published their take on ECH, the implications of it. As a reminder, encrypted client hello is the proposed extension to TLS 1.3, which encrypts the SNI data. So that's its primary function. Ostensibly for privacy purposes. The take that Corrata gives, and caveated, it's in the sort of cyber security arena, and I think it mainly serves enterprise customers, so it will take that perspective in judging it. It is, and I've sort of culled its report into a sentence, so also bear that in mind. It's more nuanced than this, but basically it highlighted mainly negatives, partly because with ECH, companies that might previously have done selective decrypt of what was traversing their network might feel that absent the SNI data, they can't afford to do selective decrypt, and they have to decrypt everything. And they also noted that some of the main beneficiaries of SNI would be currently at least Cloudflare customers, because it's by far the biggest current user of the sort of draft standard version of ECH. And they also noted that over 90% of current phishing detections are found to be hosted on Cloudflare. So therefore they thought that adding those two things together, that malicious actors would benefit potentially significantly from ECH, and make it harder for defenders on the sort of counter to that. Interesting report, worth reading properly. As I say, that's the report in a sentence. It's more complex than that, so that's worth a look. The other one, as always, I'm only going to pull out a few things. You have all of these in the weekly headlines email. If you don't get that, email me. I'll add you to the mailing list. Was NetBeacon Institute, formerly the DNS Abuse Institute, but renamed to NetBeacon, published a report on tackling DNS abuse. It's specifically targeted at the ICANN community. So because of that, it's couched in a particular way. It contains what they call policy development processes, or PDPs, for the ICANN community to consider. So potentially things that they could take on board and develop into actual policies, and potentially to amend ICANN contracts in due course. And cover a range of areas, but for example, putting more friction into the domain registration process, adding more responsibilities for registrars, or in one case registries. So just inserting additional sort of friction, checkpoints, etc., to reduce opportunities for DNS abuse versus today. Again, worth a read. I've sort of summarise it, but I think there are about 5 different sort of proposals in their report. Also, one of the sort of issues that's been sort of in the press over the last couple of weeks, highlighted last week by Domain Tools, is sort of linked to recruitment. Ironically, sort of what Domain Tools has found is some potential malicious domains that would be sort of used to attract sort of job seekers to fake opportunities. The issue that's been highlighted recently, and was also covered by DNS Filter this week, is when you've got so-called deepfake candidates successfully being recruited by companies. Effectively, you're sort of taking an attacker into your company on your headcount potentially. And there's been sort of various reported instances over the last few weeks of North Korean recruitees with sort of faked resumes, etc., and ending up on the books of various tech companies. So between them, coincidentally this week, Domain Tools and DNS Filter looked at the sort of two sides of that, both fake job sites and fake applicants. Perhaps you could marry those two up, and they could annoy each other and leave the rest of us in peace. The other one at the bottom of the screen there, you'll see AdGuard has covered a range of things in their so-called Tech Talk number 7. Various things which are interesting. One of which was DNS specific, which was differences between DOE and DOQ. DNS over quick, and they concluded, again, a one-sentence summary of a slightly longer piece, although it wasn't excessively long. A DOQ is better in privacy terms than DOE, but I say it's not a long piece, so that's worth a look. Just saying, form your own view. And then I think this was the last one from the headlines. Oh yeah, which is just a reminder, deadline of tomorrow. There's a current consultation on the sort of governance document that covers the regional internet registries, RIRs. So that's the likes of RIPE and ARIN and APNIC, etc. So there's a deadline of tomorrow to respond to the current draft updated governance document, and it will be discussed further during ICANN 83 in a couple of weeks' time, and then there'll be a second draft post that meeting. And then, as always, there's a whole bunch of other things that caught my eye this week. I won't mention many of them, but I will mention a handful of particular interest. So, bottom of this first screen, there's an ETSI standard that's come out on protection of AI systems from cyber threats. And coincidentally or not, the NSA has just published a joint guidance on the risk and best practices in AI data security. So both those AI related, of course, which came out within the last few days. And then a sort of random selection of other things. Researchers tried to close down GTP 03 in a controlled test, so in a sandbox, and it's you won't be too alarmed to find out that the AI managed to bypass the would-be shutdown. So Skynet will be a thing soon, no doubt. Slightly scary as it's early in the evolution of AI, but there you are. They already can ignore their human supervisors. There's also a piece a bit further down, you see NIST. They've put together an equation to determine how likely a bug was exploited. So that's quite useful. An interesting piece from RIPE on looking at cloud performance. And I think from memory, it concluded there was about a 50 millisecond latency was about average, which was perfectly fine for many applications, but not at all useful for some. So despite the hype, cloud isn't ubiquitous for all applications, I think will be the conclusion of that. But you can read the story to get the detail. And then two things at the bottom. There's an announcement that post-quantum cryptography has been added to Windows Insiders and Linux by Microsoft. I think it is open sourced, but I was quite surprised to see that so relatively early. So Microsoft moving impressively quickly. And then finally, ZDNet have put a useful summary of everything that was announced at the Google I/O conference from last week for any of us that missed all of the detail. So also worth a look at that. Okay, in terms of things coming up, a few deadlines. I mentioned the second one down on the list there, the sort of draft, so consultation on the governance draft for RARs closes tomorrow. Two that weren't on my email from earlier today, so because I missed them, so apologies. If you want to go to the Internet Governance Forum in Oslo next month, towards the end of June. The deadline for registration is the 1st of June, so that's coming up pretty soon. And also, if you are planning to go to the ITF 123 meeting in Madrid towards the end of July, the super early registration deadline is the 2nd of June, after which you can still register, but the cost bumps up somewhat. So you can save a few $100s by registering sooner rather than later to attend in person, and it's still a worthwhile saving if you're attending remotely. I should also say that there are fee waivers are readily available for remote attendance as well. And yeah, final one in bold there. Anyone plan to go to the Net UK conference in July? I think that is early July. The deadline for the call for presentations is also the 2nd of June, so coming up in a few days' time. Okay, and in terms of events, there's loads of those. I won't go through all of those. The ones on the screen are just things that I'm aware of over the next couple of months, but plenty of variety there. So probably no more I can really say on that. And then, yeah, in terms of, I said I'd come back to at the start of the call. In terms of topic for next week, Jeff Houston is going to be joining us. So Kurt will be aware of this. Good chat with Jeff, in fact, over several breakfasts in the right meeting a week or so ago. And one of the things Jeff mentioned was he had thoughts on a much more efficient way to handle the route for the DNS. And he's going to share his thoughts on that with us next Monday. Sadly for Jeff, he's flying back to Canberra from Europe today, I believe, but it'd be a early start on, I think, the early hours of Tuesday morning for Jeff when he joins us. So should be an interesting chat, but be kind to him in terms of any questions. He might be a bit tired. Both from possibly some residual jet lag and also because it will be early in the morning, probably pitch dark when he does the call. So we're very generous of him making this time available to do that. And then the other topic I said I'd come back to, had a discussion with Adam Networks and others about possibly a zero trust DNS discussion at a future OARC meeting. I'm not sure that's going to happen, so I'm going to see instead if we can have that discussion on this call. So I haven't done it yet. I'll be doing it after the call, but David, you've got an advance warning. I'll be reaching out to you as well as Microsoft and Infoblox to see if you want to have a three-way sort of chat on whether there's any reason for enterprises not to go down the zero trust path. Is that the only sensible path for enterprises in terms of their DNS approach to how they handle the DNS looking forward? So you can prepare your thoughts on that. And yeah, there's a couple of things one I've pushed off to dates TBA because it's taking too long to arrange, but also an interesting talk on getting threat intelligence from malicious domains, which again I hope to have added to the list with a firm date by next week. So I think that's pretty much it from me. We're on any other business, but before that, as always, I want to thank our sponsors of the call, DNS OARC, for their sort of long-term sponsorship of the call, which is much appreciated. But on that note, let me stop sharing and see if anyone has anything they want to share, prompting Peter if no one else does, or as well as anyone else that might. Peter, whilst we were chatting before the start of the call, had some interesting observations whilst at the APAC DNS event, I think last week, Peter. But you're welcome to share those, but also open up to anybody else as well.
Were you going to be talking to David about zero trust stuff? Sorry.
Oh, well, no, not on this.
Sorry.
I wanted to highlight to David that will be a topic for a future call.
Right, sorry.
But we're probably with Microsoft and Infoblox if they're interested to take part. And awesome. Obviously, it's welcome to join the discussion, but I think three of them have specific points of view. It'd be useful to kick off a discussion with.
So yeah, I went to the APAC DNS forum in Hanoi, Vietnam, a couple of weeks ago. It was on the 8th and 9th of May. I was sent as the representative of FIRST, the Forum of Incident Responders and Security Teams. And yeah, it was really interesting. I think it was the first time in Hanoi for me, in Vietnam actually. And it was interesting in particular because I think when I'd been to APAC before, I didn't quite grab how different some of the the feel for like the DNS community and everything was over there. One comment I heard was that most people in Asia Pac don't know what ICANN is, which I thought was quite surprising. I mean, ICANN should be better known on this side of the world as well. But it was, yeah, I think a lot of people were just not aware at all of ICANN or their role in the sort of how, what's there, promoting the stability and security of the internet. So that was really interesting. Also, I think a reason for that is because a lot of stuff is dealt with like regionally, sort of more in-house in a way. I met a really interesting guy from Indonesia, who is part of an organization called, hang on, sorry, I'm saying lots of words to try, APG, which is a kind of like local IANA. And they are an organization which all the ISPs in Indonesia have to be part of. And there's thousands of them for all the little islands and different places. And it's a huge country. And they're responsible for IP allocation and all those kind of things. So most of the ISPs don't apply for IP blocks themselves or anything like that. I mean, it's the same in other countries, of course, but I think the visibility of IANA and ICANN is a bit more, is a bit greater somehow. But yeah, it was really interesting. There was some good cybersecurity talks. There was an interesting one done by what's now called the NetBeacon Institute. There was some talk about NIS NIS2, about how it's going to affect domain registrars as well. And yeah, I got a lot of questions about, I mean, from first perspective, that a lot of people talk to me about sharing data. So there's a lot of people who have got like burgeoning initiatives and things that they want to get off the ground and are trying to make aware of things. So yeah, it was interesting, and it was hosted in the Landmark 72 building in Hanoi, which is the tallest building in Hanoi. So there were some good views from the top there. Well, the top, what was it? They call it observation platform, something like that. Was closed, but you could go up to the 71st floor, and it was pretty amazing. There was a welcome social on the first day, which was a little bit. It, well, we had a long speech from someone from the Vietnamese government, which was in Vietnamese, and it was quite hot, but the food was not. So it was nice. It was nice to kind of sit out and have a chat with some people outside. But I think a lot of people were quite yeah, how do I put this diplomatically? Like happy to get back to the hotel and kind of cool down a bit. It was very muggy, so yeah, getting used to that. Yeah, I think that was probably the highlights for me. Just me, most of the value I got from it, as usual, is from the chats between the sessions. But I did come away with a whole ton of follow-ups to make, which is slightly daunting. But yeah. Anyway, there you go. Oh, there'll be an update, a little post basically saying what I just said on first.org, or the first.org blog, I think. Just kind of saying, Oh, and I had to say, kudos to the ICANN stakeholder engagement team. It was really well organized. The food was great in the hotel, and it all ran very smoothly. So yeah.
Yeah. And this was in your capacity, rather marvelous job title, as the first ambassador for DNS abuse.
Yes, that's the one. That's one. I completely forgot my business cards as well, which I wanted to hand out with that title on it. But yeah.
Small suggestion on my part, maybe they want to add the word prevention to the end of your job.
I think technically I'm the DNS abuse policy ambassador, but it's it's too many syllables.
Although I think it should be DNS abuse prevention.
Prevention. That's too many syllables as well, Andrew. I'm sorry. I'm just gonna keep evangelizing DNS abuse across the world.
You just try to keep yourself in a job,
Can I give a little quick up if I've got a minute, just to give a quick update on first. Um,
which
so the
is a meeting end of next month, I think.
Yes, FirstCon 2025, which I'm not going to. Unfortunately, they don't give discounts to like people who are working for First, and I don't have a corporate sponsor at the moment to send me over, so I'm not going. But I am recording an update in a minute. The first DNS abuse SIG is we're currently working on stakeholder advice to stakeholders, and we are working our way through the list of DNS abuse techniques. There's 21 of them, which are in our published DNS abuse techniques matrix, which lists all the different techniques and the stakeholders involved for detection, mitigation, and prevention. And yeah, so what we're doing now is going through each one and saying, okay, well, if you're from a CERT and you're approaching a stakeholder, I don't know, ISP or something, and you want to help them get started, like let's say neither side knows particularly much about a particular type of DNS abuse, then here's some information. So it's got some definitions, some actual specific advice, examples, some other resources for each individual one. And we're publishing them on the first.org website under the DNS Abuse SIG homepage. So I think we're up to like 15 documents published at the moment. I think that's for the detection side of things. Once we get started on the prevention and mitigation side, I think it'll go a lot faster because there'll be a lot of copy pasting. But yeah, it's really good stuff, I think. And we have long discussions about exact definitions of things. I think I met one of my favorite things recently, if I've got a minute or two, was that we were talking about malicious registration of effective second level domains. Now the definition of that is essentially in the title. So I think we came up with threat actors use domain names for bad things, something like that, as opposed to malicious purposes, because we to avoid repeating ourselves. But yeah, it's kind of fun and interesting. So there you go.
Good stuff. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, I guess a topic which sadly isn't going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, sorry. This technique is when someone who is going to do a bad thing registered a domain name themselves. That's our definition, which I think is accurate.
Hard to argue with.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. And like I said, it's prompted a few observations in the chat, not least of which from Philippe, who gave a presentation on aspects of ICANN to the Bangladeshi NOG, and concurs about familiarity with ICANN isn't as high as it could be with some ISPs in Asia. So sort of shares your
Yeah, that's really interesting. Philippe, do you want to share that link if there is one? Sorry to interrupt.
Hi, Peter. No, that's fine. To be honest, I don't know if there's a link, but I can find out. I think it was recorded. I think it's on YouTube. I'm not sure, but let me find out and I'll share with the list.
Cool. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Philippe. Okay. We have 3 minutes left. So does anyone else have anything else that you would like to share? If so, you can do so by unmuting and talking, and that's completely fine. And if not, and I'm not seeing any signs of anyone doing that, I can't see any hands raised or anything else. If not, then we'll get a reminder to on the call next week. There'll be more of us because it won't be Memorial Day or public holiday in the UK, amongst other things. And we should have Jeff Houston sharing his thoughts on a different way of doing the route, which, without stealing his thunder, would save an inordinate amount of resources and therefore energy, and also give a big performance boost. So there's a trailer to what Jeff may lead in with next week. So you'll have to join next week to find out how he proposes to do that. And if he's available, I will try and get Warren Kamari on the call to play devil's advocate, to give the downside of some of that thought. Anyway, that's just to whet your appetite for our next week's session, which should be quite fun. But on that note, have a fantastic week in the meantime, and look forward to catching up with everyone same time next week. So see you then.
Thanks, Andrew. Cheers, everyone.
Yeah, goodbye.